Hi, my name is Sean Carr, and this is Uncommon.
Uncommon is a production by Neuralle, a full-service digital agency. If you want to grow with a premium agency and have the ability to work with Jordan directly, then learn more at neuralle.com/media and request a callback. That's neuralle.com/media.
My name is Jordan Michaelides, and I'm your host on a show where we dig deep on unique individuals. If you like the show, subscribe. We would love that. It gives us a lot of support and helps us keep things going as well. You can always give us a nice little like, which is always useful. Show notes are down below, just in the comments section. You can also find a link there in the description. It's neuralle.com/podcast for all previous episodes. If you want to listen to the audio, if you don't want to be watching it on YouTube, you can find us on all your good podcast apps. That's Uncommon Show. You'll be able to find us everywhere. If you want to see behind the scenes with us, what we're doing each week, search Uncommon or at Uncommon_show on Instagram, and you'll find us there. But what can I say? Thank you so much for checking us out, and let's get into it. My guest this week is Sean Carr, founder of Hyperlocal News and Educaring Africa, publisher of CBD, Docklands, Southbank News, and the directories for both Dockland and Southbank as well.
Nailed it.
Sean, thanks for coming in, mate.
Thanks for having me.
Janelle, your lovely partner, gave me some great notes. So for openers, I was thinking, let's do true or false.
Okay, you're right.
I had at least 8 here, but I'm gonna rattle it down to 4. So, the first one, the most important one: will St Kilda be premiers in 2020?
True.
Good, I like that. Is it true that Janelle's cat does not like you?
True.
Okay. Your mum once went viral in the Bayside Community Hub.
True.
By the way, I couldn't find that at all.
I can send it to you if you'd like.
Okay, if you
it
can.
makes for a good laugh. Very good
I was
laugh.
searching Pam Carr, Bayside Community Hub. I tried going into the Community Hub. For some reason, I just couldn't find it.
Did Janelle tell you what it was related to?
Yeah, it was
Did she give you a clue?
a fox.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which, by the way, has happened to Lauren and I years ago
Really similar incident.
when we were at the beach. I don't know, like on the sort of grassy area of the beach down near Green Point.
Yeah.
They like to hang around there.
Yeah. Pam, my mum, swears that they're forming some sort of revolution. They're everywhere foxes, apparently.
I like that. Is it true that you water Guzman and Gomez about 3 times a week?
It's a fair average, but I'm trying to work on that and lower it and bring my own lunch a bit more. But that is true.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you the only journalist that drives a ute?
In Melbourne, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe not in the country. Yeah.
I like that one. And the last one for you, you played a hole of golf naked in the King Island.
True. Yeah.
Why the fuck did you think, I'm going to do this?
Well, so me and Janelle were at King Island for New Year's, like literally on New Year's Eve. And going over to King Island, we didn't really know like what to do outside of go to the cheese factory and, go on walks and
Play golf.
Yeah, but then some friends had said, you've got to check out the golf courses over there. They're world class. And so Janelle's not huge on golf, and I don't play that much. But I thought, these courses sound like they're right on the ocean. It'd be a good opportunity to see the island. So on New Year's Eve, we get there for 9 holes, and Janelle played with me. And we got there about half an hour early, and the guy at the pro shop was so keen to have us in because we were the only ones booked for the day, and he wanted to go home. So early on, I had a clue that we were the only people on the course, and it's pretty remote out at this course in King Island. So, yeah, I think about probably 7th hole in, I thought, stuff it, let's enjoy the outdoors.
I've never been to King Island, ever. Do you rate it?
I do, yeah. I mean, it depends what you're going for. We loved it because it was really quiet. Apparently there's only 1,600 people that live on the island, and from one end to the other it's about 60 kilometres.
Okay.
So it's a big island, but it's just a lot of farm. But it's beautiful. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, the only thing I know it for, I think that anyone here in Australia knows it for, is cheese, right? King Island cheese.
Yeah, King Island Dairy, yeah.
Yeah, King Island Dairy, that's it.
Which was part of the lure for Janelle because she particularly loves her cheese.
Does she?
Yeah.
She's aficionado.
Yes.
Do you happen to know, this is a funny one, I was just doing my research and of course I found your mum's Facebook profile. Are you somehow related to Amandine?
Oh, Amandine Dwee.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, we're not related. We're family friends. So mum's best friend is Aliska, who's Ami's mum. Yeah.
Wow.
Which stems from Ami's younger sister Sophie. Me and Sophie were in primary school together from like prep.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
But then they moved up to Red Hill, and then mum and Aliska have hit it off ever since and formed this beautiful friendship. Which
I thought so because I was like, holy shit, Lauren, they somehow know these guys. So I know Ami from a guy that she used to date that was in a friendship group.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And then for whatever reason they broke up, and then a few years later I saw her again and she was working at Laneway Greens, and I knew the guys at Laneway Greens as well.
Yeah, well,
they both date the brothers.
Twins. Yeah. The twins.
And they've both had kids as well.
It is. It's an incredible little story, that. Laneway Greens is a good place as well.
Great place.
Good grub.
They just changed there. They had bowls and they switched to choose your own, which actually I was more in favour of, and now they've switched back to bowls. And
they're really clever guys. I think they've moved over to San Francisco at the moment to do some sort of like Google-like entrepreneurial stuff.
Yeah, well, they actually sold, I'm pretty sure they sold Laneway Greens.
They did. Yeah. But then I'm pretty sure it's Google, don't quote me on that, but they like heard of their success, obviously, and wanted them to come work on some project for them. So, yeah, they are. They're really unique characters and very successful.
That's for
sure.
Yeah, we were meant to interview them, but then all this stuff happened, and then all of a sudden they're in San Francisco.
Yeah, they've definitely got that entrepreneurial spirit. It's alive and well in those two, I think.
Now, speaking of places like Red Hill, Bowie, the Bayside, you're the Bubble. You're a Bayside boy, born and bred, I'd say.
I am, yeah.
What's sort of the earliest memory you have of your childhood?
Earliest memory of childhood. I mean, for me, it's a little bit dark, but I had cancer when I was a kid.
That's right.
I was diagnosed probably when I was about 2 or 3 years old. So my earliest memories, I think, were actually in hospital. But I mean, other than that, it was probably, when I was out of hospital, just being in the yard with my sisters. And then I remember during my treatment, the Starlight Foundation sponsored us to go to South Africa for a family holiday for 2 weeks, and that was apparently my wish. I don't remember making that wish, but go for the family I did. And that I remember that trip as well. So it was the first time meeting like my granny and my other relatives and stuff who still live over in South Africa. So
right, so they're from South Africa.
Yeah, so mum's from South Africa, from Port Elizabeth. That's where she grew up. And Dad was actually born in what was Rhodesia, but it's now Zimbabwe. And then I've got 3 older sisters, 2 of which were born in Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, and then me and my other sister Meg were born at Sandy Hospital. Yeah, and we've been in Bayside ever since.
So yeah, because I read about that Starlight Foundation thing, and like I remember when I worked at the press club, and George and a lot of these other restaurants had teams, and we played in the Starlight Foundation Cup.
Oh yeah,
that would raise money for a lot of these kids, and I was under the impression that a lot of kids who get their wishes granted by the Starlight Foundation are basically terminal.
Yeah, well, I'm not entirely sure of that. I think it was. I mean, it wasn't looking good for me for a while there. I was
really?
I was graded as like a stage 3 Wilms tumour, so I lost a kidney. But I learnt later on in life that I was in a ward with one of 5 kids in a ward, but they all had neuroblastomas, which were far more aggressive cancers. And they all passed away. And through that process, obviously, I think, mum and dad and my family and everyone associated grew bonds with these other families, obviously through, that shared traumatic experience of illness. So I think I was obviously very lucky, but I had a different cancer to them, I suppose. So, I'm not sure about how the Starlight Foundation sort of classify illness in regards to getting a trip, but I think back then it was sort of just like, you're going through a tough time and let's help out with the family.
Let's just do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, I remember that, it was really sad. That Starlight Foundation stuff was really sad. There's a lot of sick kids, and that, to me, that's going to be one of the worst things. like there's something really innate about that, like seeing a sick child. And I think that that's why a lot of those celebrities who are involved with the Starlight Foundation, they just get so much from it. Because, you know, like they're wealthy, they're successful, but those things sort of creep on you, and as dumb as that sounds, you can get bored. But when you have that other thing, and I feel like that's what you've got with a lot of the charity work that you've done.
Yeah, well,
you've got that sort of that shining light, that North Star that gives you something.
Yeah, perhaps, yeah. I suppose that's part of it. I mean, I've always been raised by my folks to always sort of try and think about others as much as you can, you know, in that kind of supportive sense. So, yeah, there probably is a bit that stems from those early years of, you know, being on the receiving end of support from the likes of Starlight Foundation hospitals and doctors. And, so I suppose, that would definitely sort of feed some of my more recent actions charity related, but I think educaring really has largely stemmed from just the African connection.
Yeah.
But yeah, the philosophical outlook definitely probably is fed a little bit by illness and early experience.
Do you, when you're growing up, like we all have these sort of stories that we see, that we hear, that sort of become part of our personality or principles later on in life. Like I know that I've said this many times in prior episodes that for me it was hard work and tenacity that I learnt from my parents just because of the nature of what was happening in their lives when I was quite young.
Yeah.
Do you sort of have a principle that stands out to you from either of your parents at all?
Yeah, I do. I suppose the real care aspect is definitely from Mum, because Dad was in the Rhodesian War when he was...
Was he really?
Yeah,
wow.
So he's still got a bit of PTSD. Which he sort of suffered all through his life, and I suppose that sort of fed more into his social approach to life. But I think also being in the army and between the two of them also migrating to a country with 2 kids and no money, you know, I definitely get a strong work ethic from both of them. Like Dad, being from the army and being a sort of very routine guy as they make you in the army, very regimented, he's never missed a day of work in his life, and he's still into his mid 60s now, works, you know, more out of a choice than anything else, because he just loves that routine. And
what does he do for work?
He's a printer.
Oh really?
Yeah.
I feel like we spoke about this like years ago when we first met, because my old man's a printer as well.
Yeah. So he does sort of like industrial scale printing. And he's sort of, and that wasn't something that he had any skills in when he moved to Australia, but it was, again, when you need to find a job quickly. I think one of his early jobs was actually Fieldies in Tulip Street, Sandringham, which then burnt down.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, so he's a bit of an old school printer, which is I didn't learn any sort of skills from him growing up in printing. It was very separate. So it's sort of ironic that I'm in print media a little bit now. So I don't know, maybe there's something ingrained in me and Dad with print. I don't know, but.
Well, you said before about your mum and that caring aspect. Did she have any jobs over the years while you were a kid?
Not necessarily like full-time work or corporate or anything like that, but she was on, you know, kindergarten committees, and she did any sort of jobs to make ends meet, like ironing and babysitting and things like that. So, and obviously looking after 4 kids, that's a huge job. So, like she obviously had a strong work ethic in her own right, and then Dad, you know, complementing that. You know, as I said, never missed a day of work in his life, and just like he's one of those guys that just get on with it type of mentality. Yeah. So, which, you know, from I suppose the care social aspect isn't probably always the most useful. So then to have Mum's experience to kind of complement the two, I think I've had a pretty good upbringing from both of them.
I was thinking, because the reason I asked is I was thinking, like, why did Sean get into journalism? I know you studied broadcast journalism, Monash. You graduated in 2013. You worked at Win. Then you moved to Southbank News. I guess, like, help me marry that up. Why was that the field that you found yourself in?
I think, again, having parents who are migrants, you know, so we've always had, while we've lived in the Bayside bubble, and that's sort of where they landed when they came to Australia, we've always had that sort of international outlook and sort of caring about broader issues. And, you know, Mum's, you know, it's a shame that Mum actually didn't end up working professionally, because she would be a very good Prime Minister. You know, like she's so engaged in politics and reads the newspapers every day and listens to ABC radio, and Dad as well, you know, in his spare time will listen to the news. So like I think as a house we household between me and my sisters. We were always talking about topical issues.
Current affairs.
Yeah, exactly. So then I suppose going into year 12, or year 11, I should say, VCE, when you're sort of thinking about the subjects you want to study, numbers was never for me. So I always chose sort of more socially skewed subjects like politics, sociology, legal, literature and English, obviously I was very good at. So played to my strengths, I suppose. And then, come deciding what you want to do at university, which is never an easy choice for a young person when you're still figuring out who you are. There was a journalism course that was offered at Monash Caulfield at the time. And to be brutally honest, my sister just above me, Mika, she was studying at Monash Caulfield at the time. And I didn't have a driver's licence, but we lived near Cheltenham Station, which is about 7 stations away from the Caulfield stop, and you can get an express service there.
Yeah.
So being a practical person, I was like, well, Caulfield's down the road, my sister's there, and they're offering this new journalism degree. And I'm like, journalism kind of seems to play to a lot of my strengths, like English and issues. And so I thought, let's give it a crack.
Do you like, because I look at how I got into this, because I remember for years my old man was like, oh, you don't want to get into printing, or you don't want to get into media or whatever, and oh, you want to be an accountant or something like that. And I enjoyed numbers in the sense of marrying it up. I never enjoyed the technicality of numbers, which is what my brother was very good at. He ended up studying maths.
Yep, okay.
At uni. And for me, I realised as time went on, the element of that industry that I gravitated towards was things that involved storytelling.
Yep.
And for me, like if I think back to it, the biggest thing for me was probably like yourself. You're sitting at the dinner table and it starts with sport and ends in like policy on infrastructure.
Yeah.
Like some heated debate, or someone would be telling a story. There's 20 or so people sitting around or whatever. Or if it's just like an ordinary night and we're debating what's actually in the paper. Do you have sort of, not seminal moments, but do you have memories like that makes you think, okay, that's why I sort of gravitated towards it?
Yeah, I think it's just having an open mind and a curiosity for lots of different things. I suppose that's just how I particularly feel like, I was exposed to that way of thinking a lot, where just purely by nature of the things that you do talk around at the dinner table or with your parents or amongst friends who, you gravitate towards during school. The curiosity, I suppose, the curiosity factor of just being interested in a lot of different stuff and exploring different topics was, I suppose, something that fed where I ended up with. But from the storytelling aspect, I suppose that definitely came once I did get into journalism, and more professionally so. I think like when you're studying a journalism degree,
you don't think about it.
Yeah, you don't. I mean, you look at the news and like if you listen to the daily news, it's all about what's the big issues in today's paper. So like to be then exposed to local news, and then what constitutes a story that makes it into a local paper or on Win TV regionally, like it was all of a sudden you're having to recalibrate your thinking from, the headline, what's the headline issue that's affecting people, and, to this lady down the road who's just received an award for doing something fantastic, you know what I mean? And so then it turns into like a profile piece.
Yeah.
And the storytelling sort of opens up, and then you go, oh, okay, well, there's more to news than just what is wrong with the world. There's actually some really good stuff you can tell and powerful stories. Yeah,
well, I feel like you hit a point there with a lot of TV media these days, or mainstream media, that it is more like a PR exercise, or it's run efficiently like a PR organisation as opposed to a news organisation.
Yeah.
And that's just, unfortunately, the nature of what the industry has become. I was actually reading Umbrella the other day and saw that, of course, Seven West Media still is like hemorrhaging massive amounts of money.
Yeah.
And I think that people have realised that, and a lot of the new media brands are ones that tell really interesting stories, and they don't have to always be positive, but they are stories because that's what we want. Like, if I look at, let's take the coronavirus as an example. How am I keeping up to date with that? Well, I've actually been following people who are former WHO specialists or epidemiologists or whatever that have their own YouTube channels and have all of a sudden started reporting on this. Because if you go, and I'll get a snippet of Channel 9 News, and it's literally just like a headline statistic.
Yeah.
It doesn't tell me anything. And it's always not stock footage, but like they've taken 3 grabs of this place.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah, and they're just focused on the numbers, like how many people have contracted it that day or how many people have died that day or where it's spread to. You know? So rather than sort of the broader discussion around, where you do tend to hear more on the likes of the ABC who are a bit more analytical, where, they're talking to that fantastic institute that recreated the virus, for example, and then it's like, okay, what's the next steps to countering this? So you're sort of feeding people with positive reinforcement rather than, what's wrong all the time, and I think people tune off from news when they just hear so much negativity.
Yeah.
They almost want to escape it. As much as that's sort of probably the wrong reaction, you don't blame people all the time when you turn on the news and it's just like, geez, this is miserable.
Well, when I go to my parents for dinner, like once a month or every few weeks on a Sunday, my mum will have the news on, but it's just like background noise.
Yeah.
They're not captively watching it.
Yeah.
But I remember like in the day when you'd watch like the detailed SBS news and stuff like that, that you would get quite into it. I guess I'm curious then is why, because you were at Win, then you went to Southbank, like doing the news as an editor there.
Yeah.
What was your mindset like at the time? Because I know that you were working there, but you're also doing your Masters in International Development. So Educaring Africa had been around for a bit now.
Yeah.
You're doing this Masters, which clearly shows that you were thinking about this is going to be my long-term life. This is what I'm going to do. But then, obviously, the opportunity came to take over what would become Hyperlocal News.
Yeah.
Run me through like your mindset at the time. What were you thinking?
I suppose, to be brutally honest, I'm probably I've never been the person that sort of has a 5 or 10 year plan. I feel like I'm pretty instinctive. I like to do what makes me happy and what I'm interested in. So I suppose Educaring Africa was born, instinctively from me being a bit tired of my journalism degree after a few years and then wanting to take a break away from it, but not wanting to do, like your classic gap year, and like having that African connection had always drawn me back there. So I did volunteering for sort of 6 months and encountered an opportunity where I could do more. So then Educaring Africa started when I was still at uni, and then I thought, I suppose that sort of recharged my journalistic battery, so to speak, where I went back for my 3rd year and I was, rejuvenated and like, I'm really going to give my final year a really good crack and, make the most out of it, because at the end of the day, you're paying a HECS debt as well, But I was looking forward to my master's degree. I'd already sort of enrolled in international development to, I suppose, facilitate my interest in educaring and where that was going at that time in my life. And but I did some internships during my journalism degree. One of them was with Southbank News and Docklands News.
Was it?
One of them was with Win, and one of them was with Metro Media, which I don't even think is around anymore. They used to do like sort of the weekly reviews and that sort of stuff. But
no shit.
So between all three, I'd kind of had print, online, broadcast, and so I had a really good feel, and also discovered that I was capable of doing it. Really enjoyed it, but come the end of your degree, unless you get offered a job, I wasn't necessarily that person that was fighting for one. I was interested, I kept in touch with the people who were in employers at those places I interned at, in a bit of a sort of loose hope, but I was looking forward to just going straight into my international development and seeing what I could take with educating. But then a job opportunity in Shepparton came up with Win. And I thought I'd be stupid to turn it down. It's a fantastic experience to get yourself on TV and get some experience in that world.
Good old Shep.
Yeah, good old Shep, exactly. Yeah, and I'd never even set foot in Shepparton before I'd started that job.
Really?
Yeah, and my first day was the 23rd of December 2013, I think.
Okay.
So 2 days before Christmas, I didn't have a car, so Mum dropped me up at this guy's house who was friends with my bureau chief at the time. So I was squatting I was renting a room off him at the time. Had 2 days work, and then came back for Christmas on the V line. Came back on Boxing Day with some friends and worked one Friday. And then that was my first week. It was Christmas, so I'm like, back in Melbourne, Shepparton, train rides. It was just this chaotic time. But eventually I got my ute, which I got off a dairy farmer in Strathmerton, which made getting from Melbourne to Shepparton a bit easier on the weekend. So that was a big plus at the time. But then I deferred my master's degree because I'd obviously embarked on Win Shepparton. And then probably about 10 months into being at Win News, I got an email from my former boss and business partner, Shane Scanlon, who says, hey Sean, hope Shepparton's going well. If it's not, you interested in the job at Southbank? So, the intrigue of
Love that.
the intrigue of that opportunity led me to have a conversation with Shane, and post that conversation, I decided that moving back to Melbourne for a job editing a local paper in the city gave me the opportunity to both still work in the industry and earn some money, but then do my master's part-time.
Yeah, and you could sort of work it out from there.
Yeah, so then that's just sort of spiraled over the journey. As I said, I really have learned. I found myself enjoying working at these newspapers more than I ever thought I would, and then that's led to where I am today in owning the stable.
Well, we were speaking in the kitchen earlier, having our coffees and teas, and I was talking about how I approached Shane probably while you were working there, about the digital element. But he obviously had you in mind potentially for handing over the business and grooming you, and you probably had no idea that this was coming. But what was that conversation like when he said to you, like, do you want to take over the business? Like, apart from ignoring the times where he said, nah, no way, when did it become serious?
Well, that conversation where it was just me and him at the office at the time, and he turned around from his desk and he says, are you interested in this business? And I said, in what way? The answer probably seemed obvious at the time, but I couldn't quite believe that he was asking me. And he says, well, are you interested in making this your own? And I said, I'd never really given it much thought, if I'm honest, Shane. As I said, I went away and gave it some thought and spoke to mum and dad and spoke to a guy called Arpad, who is a bit of a mentor of mine. He's helped out with educaring over the years, and we worked in some social enterprise stuff early on and when I was at uni and fair trade and areas like that. So he's always been one of those kind of entrepreneurial and just interesting guys that you always just go to for a good chat. And I leaned on a couple of people in life at the time, and I came to the decision eventually that it was a great opportunity and let's give it a go. So it was surreal at the time, obviously, but it's surreal. It's still surreal sometimes to think I'm a media owner in one of the world's most livable cities. It's exciting.
You're a media baron.
Yeah.
Up there
Well,
with
Shane used to refer to himself as a mini media mogul. So I'm not sure I'm quite there yet.
I've said to Lauren that there are a few things where I feel like I've made it in life, and money is not one of the things. The thing is, well, there's two things actually. One would be to buy back the Neos Cosmos, because my grandpa started that originally as the Torch. Yeah. The other would be to have a competing. I don't know how I'd do this, because our family published the first Sunday newspaper in Australia.
Really?
And it got picketed by the Herald Weekly Times and the Union, and it sent them broke. Oh. So there's something there, like as a bit of a fuck you to sort of the Herald Weekly Times. There's something I just want to own. Maybe it's the Herald Sun. Maybe I'd just like to be able to buy the Herald Sun.
Oh, jeez, if you could turn it around.
Well, to be honest, it's doing a bit better than the Age, so maybe I could buy the Age. But there's a thing though that I remember Warren Buffett would say this, that every time the market gets quite mature, there's only ever two newspapers that survive, and eventually one kills off the other. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it leads into this conversation about. Because I suppose to reverse for a second, about my thinking and decision making around, do I take over what is predominantly a print media business in 2018 or whenever it was I was making the decision, because everybody who's not necessarily in media assumes that digital's the way forward and print's dead, and I suppose on on that thought process, there's been some really encouraging signs lately in the resurgence of print media, and not just print media, but sort of like old school ways of doing things. Like how you walk into JB Hi-Fi now and they've got a vinyl section.
Yeah.
So the CD is now obsolete, and people, yes, everyone's on Spotify, but people still love that tactile experience of putting a record on which I do too, I'll admit, on a turntable and listening to an album. And it's like the same as Within Reason, and ours Within Reason exists in a specific and sort of niche market and hyperlocal. People love getting the newspaper in a mailbox and at their leisure, but just being able to flick through what's happening in their neighbourhood.
Yeah, well, it's the only thing I would read when I lived in the city. You get all that stuff delivered to your mailbox.
Yeah.
I would actually look forward to reading this thing. And I think there is that element with local news that people still really enjoy it. They want to that's one thing, although media has, and this probably comes to the business model of local news, like the opportunity for local news is still there, even though Google and Facebook have destroyed, in a way, the media because of, they've basically taken advertising or opened up advertising to small businesses, and a lot of that state or national news has become quite transactional, unless it's like an esteemed publication like the New Yorker or the Australian, where the owners own it for power and nothing else.
Yeah, exactly.
So I found it really interesting. We were saying before that, when we're chatting, the Atlantic and technically media is another one where they've sort of niched down, whether it's tech, sports, or community or crime, and they focus on those areas in America, and that seems to be what's working.
Yeah. Because it speaks to people on an individual level.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like I remember when the guy who wrote about this, he has this podcast, The Business of Content. He was saying that it's so annoying. There was actually this test by a lab, the media lab at MIT, about how localized news would increase engagement rates by like 30%. So if you could localize notifications, like push notifications on a phone, so that if you were in an area, it would hit you with a relevant article.
Well, it's the same as businesses advertising on social media, where they go, define my demographic.
Yeah.
So they're even wanting to localize. So then, so when you're thinking about, what's the future of a hyperlocal newspaper in a city, Melbourne, then you think, well, the fact that it's so targeted and the fact that CBD residents are always going to be interested in what's happening in the CBD as a general principle. And naturally, there's always enough advertising to follow because people sort of understand that connection. Yeah. And then they're on the same message, connecting to those same readers because, their ads being presented on the same page. So I think the word I always stem back to with, any media, not just ours, but, the future of sort of local is authenticity. Yeah. Like as you say, I think when you turn on the news or you flick open the Herald Sun, it doesn't immediately always speak to you. You might be interested in what's happening. I think everybody's curiosity always makes them want to find out what's going on in the world. But when it comes to the sort of new present day opportunities of new media entering the market, I think there is a real power in a lot of these sorts of niche areas, which is where we've managed to find ours in Melbourne, which is a fantastic opportunity.
Well, there's no you open that Herald Sun as an example, you skim through it. There's no real attachment to it, whereas there's a sort of personalised attachment to a lot of local news.
Yeah.
I guess I'm curious. I was thinking about what have been the highs and lows, but really what I'm intrigued about from your perspective, and this is something I spoke to Janelle about because she said that you're quite excited for the next few years. Yeah. You've changed the style, which I think has been warranted. It's given a nice refresh while still remaining true to those local stories.
Yes, thank you.
What are you really focusing your eye on for the next 12 months?
Well, contrary to everything we've just spoken about, digital.
Yeah.
So just without detracting away from what makes us unique, which is the print publication, hyperlocal, delivering to mailboxes and apartment towers, all that sort of stuff, is at the moment our websites purely act as archives. So they're like a reference point to people who might not either receive the newspaper or might want to refer to a story online. And we feel like we can do more than that. And if not achieve more, we can at least explore what opportunities are out there. So I've engaged a team at the moment to help me weave through that process and sort of just understand what opportunities there are for us. Some of the early things that have come up are around, sort of this idea of what's on in the city. I was having a conversation with one of Janelle's friends the other day, actually, and she was just saying, if I had a friend visiting Melbourne, as a tourist, and I said, take me out to the CBD and show me some cool bars and things to do, she goes, I'd be so useless. And I feel like I've had that conversation with Melburnians, i.e. my friends and people I know, all the time. And people, there's like your what's on City of Melbourne and all that sort of stuff, but I feel like we could maybe play another potential role in that space online.
100%.
Helping people discover what's out there without detracting away from the news that we publish in the print version.
I think it's funny you mention that, because Laura and I were just we were looking at our tasks for the next 2 weeks, and one thing that we need to get way better at for the podcast is being aware as to what's on in the CBD and who's travelling in and who should we be pitching about podcasts.
Yeah.
Because there's so many disjointed calendars going on, and all the PR people have got it because they're in that mix, but we don't, and a lot of consumers don't.
Yeah.
And what's on Melbourne is okay. That was the thing that I used to subscribe to, but it was just a lot of family orientated stuff.
Yes.
And I just don't think anyone's really hit that on the head yet.
No,
I don't think anyone's really succeeded with that.
No.
Like what is on and what's happening and visualizing it and geolocating it. I just don't think that has been done really well. Like for us, the options with that, what's on, Zomato, really just restaurant reviews, Broadsheet, but even Broadsheet has been lax over the years.
Yeah.
Like I just find that no one's really succeeded in doing that well.
Yeah, and look, it is a challenge because we live in Melbourne and there is just so much happening in Melbourne. Yeah, exactly. I mean, like my sister reached out, she lives in Thailand, and she was providing some recommendations to a friend who was asking around like some rooftop bars in the city. And I ended up asking, Janelle and a couple other people, do you actually... Because immediately I thought about it, and I go, there's this place, there's that place. But I really didn't have a firm grip on rooftop bars in the city. But I do know from talking to people over the years that there are heaps. So it's hard to always know what is out there. And that's going to be a perennial challenge, I think, always. But I think we can, as you say, nobody's quite nailed it yet. Not to suggest that we could, but we can have a go.
Yeah, you could have a shot at
it. Yeah. And I think having that sort of local connection as CBD News to, the Hoddle Grid itself and all the businesses and all the events and stuff that happen in there on a regular basis gives us a bit of a unique leverage point rather than just, the what's on Melbourne, City of Melbourne's website type of thing, which is such sort of like a generic reference point for people looking for what's on.
It's part of the government. They put it, they send it. There's obviously a comms person involved, and they get, from all the different departments, this is what's happening in our calendar for the next month, and they just put it there. I was intrigued. Why do you think there's the Bayside Leader? I know I was a big fan of the Bayside Leader back then. These are all these Murdoch-owned local newspapers, right, which they've tried to consolidate over the years. Why do you reckon they've never started one in the CBD or the city sort of area? People have tried.
Again, Susan Riley, who I mentioned earlier, who's a counsellor at the City of Melbourne, she's also a publisher. So I understand she used to have the Melbourne 3000 magazine. But, Postcode 3000 was only invented in 1992, I think, So it's a pretty sort of new phenomena having people who live in the central business district of Melbourne.
Wait, so when you say that, the idea of people living here or the actual postcode itself?
Well, I suppose both, when we were kids, particularly, the CBD was a place where you would have gone to work, it wasn't even a cool place to come for events. There wasn't really a lot on. And that's really sort of transformed, I feel, over the sort of last 10, 20 years of our lives. And then with that, as the populations grow, people obviously want to live close to where they work. So the CBD is now transformed into a place where, something like 60, 70,000 people now call home. It's probably more than that. A lot of students, it's very transient, diverse, but there's a lot of downsizers, for example. There's a lot of families living in the city.
Yeah. People would be surprised by that.
Yeah, so I suppose we're probably really the first to have a go at it from a business point of view, because I suppose the leaders back in the day probably would have looked at postcode 3000 and go, well, we have a local newspaper out there. You know, there's no residents and there's no one really to speak to.
So you've built, it's that Shane built up such a competitive advantage. They look at it now and go think, well, the resources we have to put towards it, whereas we're already having to consolidate resources in other papers. It's probably not worth it.
But it's manifested from Docklands, which was our first paper.
Yeah.
So Docklands, again, being an urban renewal area, when those early apartment towers went up, it was then the Docklands Authority, which is now Place Victoria, now Development Victoria. But you know, the early authority down there for the buildings that had gone up needed a form of communication to keep residents up to speed with what was going on in the area.
Yeah.
So Shane's old company, Mediacoms, won the design tender to put that together for the Docklands Authority, and the developers sponsored it, and you know, so it was this all like sort of encompassing thing. And then when that sort of got to a point where the Docklands Authority didn't want to manage it anymore, they handballed it to the City of Melbourne. City of Melbourne got through maybe one or two additions, I think Shane says, and they were, you know, we don't want this anymore. And because Shane had a journalistic background, he said, well, I sense an opportunity here to turn this into a local paper because there's only more apartments coming, and the residents that do live here at the moment really appreciate it.
Yeah. So
then he turned it into the newspaper that we, you know, well, albeit the new design, so it doesn't look the same as what it did, but he turned it into this sort of tabloid-size monthly newspaper. And then off the success of that, Southbank across the river, which, you know, probably started developing a few years before Docklands had, was in the same position where you had a lot of people moving to the city, a lot of owner-occupiers, so there's this sense of community slowly growing. And at that same time was when we started a paper over there. And then probably around the time when, you know, Southbank news was sort of heating up, and that's when this conversation about postcode 3000 really started to gear up. You know, a lot of people moving to the city. So the time was probably right to start a paper when we did. So it's been an interesting learning experience, but it's been responding to opportunity as well. So I think, you know, Murdoch now, I don't know whether he'd consider having like a Melbourne-based local newspaper, but
probably not.
Yeah, no, probably not. Yeah, but anyway, there's no room in the market left, Rupert. So stay away.
Stay away, Rupert. Monetization's an interesting one because you know we're talking about the athletic and technically media earlier. I think what they've done, although I think what local news does really well is local native advertising, which is something that mediums like podcasts do really well as well. But I was also intrigued about, there was another brand called Tap Into, which had developed local newspapers, and they'd actually developed an element where if people sort of invested X amount of budget per month, they got like an SEO like related page, so they got backlinks and PR releases could go on the website and stuff like that. I guess that raised in my mind, like, how are you thinking about monetization? Because events and local experiences has been this big thing for particularly technically media, because they're tech focused. They just started like a Philly in tech event, and that is really where they make the bulk of their money. So I guess I'm curious, like, how have you thought about, how do you daydream about monetization
in the digital space?
Yeah, well, just what you have planned longer term. Have you thought much about events or other things that you'd like to get into?
No, not to that extent. I suppose we're still sort of at the stage where, you know, I mean, right here and now, we've just been focusing on this redesign. So we're sort of just bringing the aesthetic of the paper up to a look and feel that we believe can help it last for the next sort of 20 plus years, you know. So we've sort of got that out of the way, and now the next bugbear is, okay, let's explore online. And because we've never done that before, particularly in a niche, unique market like ours, it's sort of like, all right, well, we're sort of at that early stage of conversation about, you know, what services we can provide businesses and also the community in kind. But I think the early thought process is just around, you know, there are some realistic limitations, obviously, on print media, which we, you know, encounter all the time. And I think one of the biggest ones is, while an advertiser will love to advertise in our local newspapers because of the value capture, there's also sort of analytics that will often come into about tracking and, you know, like, you know, who's actually looking at this ad type of thing. So for us, I think where our thinking is going is in line with some of the things you allude to around diversifying our offering for our advertisers to say, yeah, look, you can have your page one banner every month in CBD News, Colliers, but, here's opportunities online, that you can spread your message across different mediums, and it might be events, I know like property council or something like that, whatever those sorts of advertisers are interested in, we can maybe help facilitate an online capacity. I'm not sure, but I think it's just, it's adding more of a mix into what we can offer rather than just saying, business as usual, it's either a print ad or nothing. And then obviously, going in kind with that is social media, where, again, we're a monthly newspaper, so when we publish a story, for example, like online but particularly social media, we can share that, an article that we've published from the print edition, without it sort of detracting away from the advertisers that go in this every month.
Yeah, so it's like an added benefit in a way.
Yeah, but then social media, I suppose, the more sort of relevant, up-to-date stuff around, there's something happening at the exhibition centre this month, and so we can work with an advertiser or just, purely from an events community building capacity to play a bit of that role in social media too, so that we've just got a bit more of a day-to-day presence without, again, taking away from what we do here.
Yeah. Yeah, look, you're in not a tricky stage, you're in an interesting stage because you've gone through that redesign, and now it's about thinking about what are the systems, processes and things that I can do to make it more digital, but also help us scale.
Well, it was a really exciting. So I actually had a meeting with a creative agency last week who were engaging with this process at the moment, and sitting around the table with all these people that look after different areas, they were just when we got to the end of the nuts and bolts about what we do and sort of loosely about what we are thinking we want to achieve, they were just like, well, this is really exciting. Like this is a blank canvas essentially in a space that we can help influence and provide fresh ideas for. So I think there's a lot of excitement around what's possible.
Yeah.
What that looks like yet, is still yet to come. But I think going back to Janelle's response about me being excited over the next 2 years, I suppose that gives me a bit of optimism and excitement for what we can do and what we can achieve. Yeah.
What's the because I was reading this recently about CMS systems. I found it funny, like the Australian uses WordPress.
Yeah, right.
Do you and I know recently there was ARC, which was just released by the Washington Post to help local news with updating their CMS system. I feel like actually they offered it like free if you're a local news organisation.
Is that right?
Yeah. Anyway, what system do you guys use for publishing at the moment? Because that'll be like one of the big changes for you, is changing the CMS.
Yeah, as in publishing online.
Yeah.
So the online, these platforms that we use for Docklands and Southbank are so dated that most listeners probably won't know.
Oh, but that's the thing. That's the industry. That's what I remember. One guy in the business of content was saying that he'd gone back to his old newspaper, the local newspaper that he started at. And even in 2008 when he was there, the system was outdated, but they were still using that system. Yeah. And then no one would have heard what it was called.
Yeah, well, again, from a purely archival capacity, our systems serve us pretty well because they're easy to upload. And I shouldn't say that. The platforms that we use for Southbank and Docklands are called Expression Engine. Okay. It's this ancient system that a few developers actually even heard of.
Expression Engine.
Yeah, and it's clunky and it's not the most user friendly system for me and my team of journalists to upload stories to online every month, which is part of the reason why we also want to change, just purely from a functionality point of view, efficiency, all the rest of it. But CBD is a WordPress site. Okay. But again, I suppose Shane's passionate and yet sort of stubborn belief in the power of print media and hyperlocal meant that I'm having conversations with him over the past few years about, maybe we should start exploring what's online a bit. And he goes, online's never been part of the business model. And I suppose that sort of mode of thinking has, pervaded where we're at now. Where we've got these sort of dated systems that are so sort of well past it that now I'm just going for a clean slate. Yeah. Just going with fresh systems and fresh ideas and, new momentum.
Yeah.
Because they are they're well past their use by date. I think.
But that is a lot of the industry. I mean, like, if you work at any large corporation as well, there's always some like legacy system that you just know if they were to redevelop this thing, like they would have to just throw it out and just start afresh.
Yeah.
And it's just the reality of the situation. I feel like that is something that was from an era of 10 to 15 years ago where you would build a system and change it every so often. But now a lot of these new CMS systems, and WordPress is great like that they're just constantly updating the code base, which makes it better for you as a publisher.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what I think Arc has done really well. But WordPress is still like a classic among a lot of publishers. But I was just surprised that the Australian uses WordPress.
I didn't know that.
News Corp hadn't built their own, or the News Corp hadn't used, because they own, I feel like they own part of Vox, and Vox has got one.
Yeah, okay.
So anyway, I just found that super fucking interesting.
Well, I think as well, from the aesthetic point of view, even online and the functionality of it all, I've looked at a couple of other models of how, some influences of what we maybe want to mirror with our new look websites. And I go into the Herald Sun and the Age and these classic news sites, and they're just saturated with a bit too much.
There's way too much.
I get anxiety when I go on their website a little bit because there's just too much going on. And I think that's like with the new design, we've gone for a little bit more cleaner, minimalist type of a look. So I think that's sort of where I'm looking to simplify things on our website a little bit by just having some couple of like key features that just draws people in, rather than sort of you get to the website on the Herald Sun and you're just like, geez, I just want to look for this story that I heard today and it's not here, and where's the search button? I find it a stressful experience. I think from our point of view, not being the Herald Sun, obviously we're local news, we want to just sort of simplify that a little bit, make it user friendly.
If you look at the CBD news, I don't know if the actual audience can see this, but you've got the good old Chinese characters right at the top here. You've got the Chinese archive. Do you still have the Chinese version?
There's a page of translations.
That's right.
And that's another area that with the creative team that we've started having conversations with, is another area that we're looking to explore more. So whether that be transcribing every story in the paper and putting it online, for example, how we relate that to a Chinese audience is still sort of up for discussion. But with the new designs, we do have a page of Chinese translations in every paper now, and that is paying respect to the sheer number of Mandarin-speaking people that live in our postcodes, particularly in the CBD, where I think it's like 40-something% of the people who are actually established in the CBD speak Mandarin. So it's definitely a necessary aspect of our market. So we need to obviously pay respect to that and just show them that we acknowledge their existence.
Yeah, well, 100%. I mean, if you go down Elizabeth Street near Latrobe and whatnot, is now become like it's another Chinatown in a way. It's a real like mini megapolis. The way that those apartments have sprung up, and there's so many expats. Yeah. Which
that
at the moment,
North End is just like
it's
RMIT
crazy.
And it's crazy.
I think about that area 10 years ago around RMIT. It was nothing. It was just factories and shit. Like
it's all student accommodation now.
It's wild. What have you learnt? I guess what have been the highs and lows of learning from that market? Are you getting more Chinese advertisers approaching you, or have you found that quite hard?
Found that quite hard.
Yeah.
In saying that, we've made a few approaches to Chinese business community. There's a Chinese there's a councillor on Sydney Melbourne, Kevin Louis, who's got sort of a good intel into that world. There's Chinatown precinct. So there's some strong links there that we have explored, but you walk around those areas of the city which you mentioned, and there's actually a lot of Chinese publications already there.
There's a lot, yeah.
And they get a lot of advertising from, all, not just in the city, but all parts of town. It is a challenge breaking into that market. We have explored the idea of just trying to subsidise the translations page at least. And that's also potentially a good barometer into tracking, the Chinese engagement, because then if, a business is doing well out of it, then they might say, keep this going. But no, it is. It's a hard community to crack into, but we're keen to try, and at least keen to pay them some respect that if they do pick up the paper, then there's something in there for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of first-generation immigrants or expats, they always trust insiders first. Yeah. I feel like organisations like AOK is a good one, or Allfin when it comes to the finance space. They have dominated like local financial news. It's quite amazing. They have like 1 million readers.
Wow.
On like a weekly basis or something like that, and they've got like a YouTube channel, and they just the guy who's in charge of that is just really, really well connected with both the local Chinese community but also the local business community, because he's sort of that conduit between the two.
Yeah.
It's super, super tough. Like you'd almost have to start like your own little Chinatown bureau, wouldn't you?
Well,
I feel like to really crack into it.
Yeah, I mean. Again, exploring down the track, it'd be great to. I mean, we actually did have a Chinese journalist at one point.
Right.
Yeah, she's not with us anymore. But there has been that idea around whether it is just a journalist or it's someone who can write and also engage with business community. So sort of that. I suppose a Chinese correspondent in a way in the CBD.
Yeah. Your local fixer.
Yeah, because I think it is really important. It is a challenge, as I say, trying to engage with the Chinese community, because they are sort of they are a bit closed off. It's fair to say.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people like the Chinatown precinct who want to engage more broadly. So it's trying to support those people and tap into the opportunities that do exist, I suppose. But that probably does require somebody who's dedicated and understands that the complexities of that community.
You were saying before about where you get your inspiration from in terms of newspapers. You didn't say who, but I guess I was intrigued. Ignoring Shane for the moment, who were sort of the leaders in media that you respect, or particular publications that you really enjoy?
Oh, that's a good question. I suppose I had a small, extending back to local news, I suppose I was the same. My first encounter with local news would have been the Bayside Leader too, and it was interesting. I found when I was a kid, you get a weekly Bayside Leader in the mailbox, and as a kid you're looking to that like little sports star section where the kid at the local sports club's got an award or something, and sometimes that would be a kid from Beaumaris, or it might be someone that you've played soccer against down in Sandringham or something like that. And so there was sort of that interesting connection around, who do I know in the paper this month, I suppose, even from a young age. So I suppose, it's led me to have an appreciation for local news enough to obviously want to sort of get back into it as a career. But from a news point of view, it's always been the ABC, I think, from a local point of view. I mean, from as young as I can remember, Mum's always had 774 John Fane's voice blaring out the radio. And then obviously, TV and, like Q&A Monday nights and all that sort of stuff with Four Corners. And
Four Corners is still good.
Yeah.
Q&A I'm not so sure about these days.
Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, at least I think it's good that they've at least gone with Hamish to expand into a bit more sort of a youthful audience a little bit, because I think Tony Jones was as much as I love you, TJ, he's getting a little bit tired.
Yeah, I just think it's the format is not great. It used to be good, but now it's just it's a stacked panel. It's not a very even panel in terms of political leanings. People just argue the whole time.
Yeah,
There's I can tell you for sure, every time there's politicians on the panel, I fucking never watch it.
I feel like unfortunately with Q&A, they're sort of that feeling that people have towards it is symptomatic of the fact of how depressing our current leaders are in politics. I often switch off the news because I hear like a Barnaby Joyce or somebody talking about climate change. I just go, Jesus, change the record. And these are the same politicians that generally speaking will come on the panel, and it's this ideological battle where they just yell at each other. They don't answer questions directly. So you tune in and you go, what's the point of listening to this? I'm not getting any sort of real
Yeah.
I'm not getting any realness out of these people, you know. And then the occasional time when you do have a panel that is apolitical, you know, like it's based on an issue where they've got experts in, it's fantastic, you know, because they're having a really good discussion.
Yeah.
So I think politics in Australia is the problem at the moment, perhaps for Q&A's decline in interest.
Yeah, I think it's just the nature of politics now with social media has sort of given rise to more popular viewpoints on either side of politics, and it means that a lot of people who are in the middle, who are rationally in the middle, get squeezed out, which is why a lot of people tune out from these types of formats.
Yeah.
I would much rather listen to a 3-hour podcast between two people who somewhat disagree or have different opinions on something and like really flesh out an idea.
Yeah.
Because then you build a nuanced opinion. It's like, again, going back to sitting at the dinner table with family and whatnot. It's like having a debate on a topic.
Well, that's where like Raph Epstein on 774 in the afternoons has Fight Club, you know, where he gets the two politicians on to have it out, and that there's always, I find, respectful yet fierce debate. And it's just because you're in an environment like this where it's very sort of like, you know, comfortable and natural and easy and conversational, and you do tend to get a little bit more realness out of their answers rather than when you're on this stage panel in front of a live audience broadcast to Australia. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like you're speaking off the top of a mountain as opposed to just like speaking to your audience.
Yeah.
You know, I think
or to
they've
the
lost
person that's opposite.
Yeah, they've lost that connection, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to talk about Educaring Africa before we get into our rapid fire questions. I'm very intrigued by rapid fire.
That sounds
yeah.
interesting.
I've been very intrigued by the effective altruism movement, particularly people like Will McCaskill, but the more famous one is Peter Singer that everyone always references. I know that you got into this charity work you started your own charity at 21, but before that you'd worked in South Africa, Kenya again, and then Malawi, and I think it was 2012 where you really honed your focus on supporting secondary students to go to school. And I remember when you were raising money for that, it was a super interesting campaign. I remember reading something in the Bayside Leader.
Yeah.
I actually found that old article.
I forgot that, yeah.
I think I know it's one of the things that your partner Janelle really likes about your personality or loves about your personality, that passion to help people.
Thanks, Janelle.
And I think that we were speaking before, obviously, about you visiting South Africa or Africa as a kid, and we spoke about the fact that civic mindedness comes from your mum. Why specifically helping people in healthcare and education, and why specifically these two countries?
It's pretty random. People often ask me why Malawi, and the honest answer to that is, as I said, I just wanted to get away from Melbourne for a while as a young 20-year-old, sort of disengaged and a bit disenchanted with university at the time, and I was in a bit of a funk, and so I just wanted to, you know, escape and do something meaningful. So I thought, you know, I've always wanted to go to Africa. I never necessarily had thought, you know, a determined mind to go volunteer and like make a difference, but then naturally I've always been someone that likes engaging with people, and that extends to my interest in travelling, I suppose. So when I was travelling in Africa, I thought, I don't want to just go on safari and, you know, do the normal bullshit. You know, I want to actually go and, you know, experience a little bit of what it's like to be an African in a rural community. So no better way to do that than explore some NGOs that are out there and do some volunteering. So I'd always wanted to do some wildlife-related stuff. I was a big fan of Lion King when I was a kid. So I chased for a few weeks that opportunity to go into Lion King Africa, and I found an opportunity to do that with, I think they were called Wildlife Quest Kenya, and that was wildlife research on the Kenyan-Tanzanian border in a town called Rombo for 2 weeks. So we were literally out on just like a open plain conservancy. Kilimanjaro's right there. You wake up every morning and there's like a giraffe, you know, like 100 metres away from your campsite. You're just like, this is a dream come true. So I had that aspect of my trip sorted, and then I thought next I could either do a couple of countries, but then I came to the decision that I really wanted to just do, you know, like 5-6 weeks in one country and really do it well, you know, and understand it and build a bit of a connection with it. And it was completely random online. I think I found an opportunity in, say, Zambia, and then there was another one in Malawi. And I remember one night just after dinner talking to Mum when I was still living at home back in those days, and I said to her, Mum, what do you reckon? Zambia, Malawi, I found these two really cool opportunities. And she just said, oh, I've heard really cool things about Malawi. Maybe give that one a go. And I said, okay. So I picked Malawi completely off the cuff. And when I got there, it had such like a distinct difference from Kenya and Nairobi and Tanzania already. I couldn't really put my finger on it. It's more your sort of everyday African community when you get into Malawi, whereas, when you get to Kenya, you get to Nairobi and it's like still like quite a big city.
It's a big city.
But then as soon as you get out of that, it's so like quintessential what you would associate Africa to be. Whereas when you get to Malawi, it's sort of just like this sort of everyday, almost like working class little place. But the people there were just fantastic from the outset. Like you struggled not to see a smile on somebody's face, despite the situations that they found themselves in with nothing. And yeah, through that experience, obviously, I did some education volunteering as a teacher, which was an enormous challenge at 20. I had classes of like 60 kids.
Jesus.
Obviously,
what were you teaching them?
English.
Okay.
Yeah, and it was a real shit show if I'm honest. Because the schools that I was volunteering at in rural Malawi, in the town called Monkey Bay, which I still go back to every year, these schools were struggling, to the point where they didn't have qualified teachers. And you have 8 years of primary school in Malawi and 4 years of high school. So you got a lot of kids at these schools, big class sizes, and most of them are being taught by civil servants. Most of them aren't even qualified teachers. So they'd see this like, Mzungu white person coming into town saying, oh, you must be like a really well-equipped, experienced teacher. Here, take over the class day one. And I'm like, whoa, So
they just wanted to chop out.
Yeah, well, correct, exactly. And then I suppose the more I sort of embarked on that experience, I realised that what I was doing there in many ways almost was, like, without sounding too negative, it was a little bit sort of harmful in the sense that, having a guy come in for 6 weeks and teach them English is not what they need. They need someone there every day, a Malawian teacher who's going to be there to support them, who understands all their needs and all their different levels and the curriculum. And because I fly out and then like another volunteer might come in, they might not, and then almost all of a sudden they sort of lose that momentum. So that was an early thing that I identified when I was there, that these kids need a lot more. They need a lot more support. That was evident to see just purely based on the class sizes and the state of the classrooms and the teaching resources. Like the kids there didn't even have books, a lot of them. They didn't have anything to write in.
Wow.
So it's just that basic stuff that you just go, so easy to access in our country, but really difficult over there. And then I suppose over the journey, over that 6 week journey, which I ended up getting a lot out of, because at the beginning I looked at where all the kids were at in my standard 3 class, which I think was sort of, the median, the average age bracket for a standard 9 kid in Malawi is like 9 years old. Mm. And I had 2 classes, and across 2 classes I'm meeting kids who were 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 years old in some cases, like tall kids and short kids. And you go, how does this happen? A lot of them repeat. And then based on that already, you can determine the fact that they're at different levels of learning. Like there's some kids here who are excelling, and there's some kids here who are just in this repetitious cycle of probably repeating a lot of the same stuff. So when I came in and teaching English, the civil servant hands me a book, like the Malawi English book for standard 3, and he says, we're doing this lesson today. And I can't remember exactly what the lesson was, but I said, okay, well, I'll do a bit of a soundbite, see what these kids are up to for today. So I went through and taught the kids around, went around, and I realised that probably about 60% of the class actually weren't able to do this lesson that we were at, purely based on the fact that they didn't know what an adjective was, they didn't know what a noun was, they didn't know what conjunctions were, they couldn't build sentences. So I scrapped the book on day 2 and from the start taught them about the basics of English. And by my 6 weeks, most of them were able, at least in groups, some at an individual level, to be able to write a basic sentence in English.
Wow.
So I saw that and I go, well, I was proud that I'd been able to apply myself and get something out of it, for not just for me, but for the kids. But then, you're leaving. And then in that same sort of experience, I'd meet a lot of kids who were finishing standard 8, and they're waiting for high school the following year. But the school system over there works similar almost to our university system, where like the better your enter score is, the better course and university you qualify for. Over there,
really?
The better you finish on a primary school leaving examination, the better school that you can get into. So it's a government, private, or like a boarding school, and obviously the fees fluctuate according to the quality of the school. So you'd have kids in Monkey Bay, Malawi, who are living in the same rural conditions as all their neighbours, who are really talented and smart, saying, I can get into a private boarding school in Mangochi, which is 45 minutes up the road, but we can't afford to go. So then you'd meet these kids and you talk to headmasters and you realise that there's a lot of kids in this same predicament. You're like, geez, So I, as a 20-year-old uni student at the time, thought I'd built a connection through some tutoring with some of the kids that I was like, I'd like to work through the headmasters to support you via NGO. But then the more schools you went round to in the area and the more headmasters you spoke to, you just realised sort of the scope of the problem. There was a lot of kids who literally couldn't finish school. Which is giving them some fighting chance of, literacy and an opportunity in life. So if they can't even get through school, you go, well, what's the point? And then when you learn just how little it costs to get them through school, you go, oh shit, I think we can maybe try and do something about this. So that's where, Educaring was kind of born, because I got home eventually and had a belated 21st, because I'd had my 21st in South Africa with family after I was in Malawi. Uh-huh. And I used that as a fundraiser. And such was the support that we got on the night that we managed to put a smidgen over 100 kids through school with the money raised on that night for a year.
Wow.
Yeah, so then based on that, obviously, you go, well, I can't just get these kids through school for 1 year. You've got to do it 4 years.
Yeah, I can see where the caring element comes in, because you feel a sense of guilt because you care. Ooh. And you want to do more.
You're conflicted, yeah. Totally.
Which is a good thing.
yeah. But then it's snowballed into something a lot bigger that I never set out to achieve. Necessarily when I went to Africa, I didn't hop on the plane going like, oh yeah, when I get back from this trip, I'm going to start a charity. It just literally snowballed because of an opportunity to help. And then when you show that side of yourself and that you do care, then naturally there's other opportunities that are going to open up from working with an NGO in rural Malawi, where they say, like our medical volunteering needs more inventory, or there's another kid here who needs support, or so it's within reason, obviously, without broadening out too much to just be like we're handing out money. It was a very like sort of facilitatory relationship with our NGO, working through them, who were registered, that then gave rise to this idea of, well, if we want to keep doing this and supporting it, and we're seeing the impacts of kids being able to go through school, and let's start a movement here. Let's get a logo and a website, and maybe start a few more events. And so that's where it led to, and that's where we ended up.
And it's sort of, you can see that you look at problems like, let's say, these kids with the lessons that you were giving them, and you often look at issues from a strategic point of view, as opposed to let's just throw money at this thing, which I guess is what the effective altruism movement is about.
Yeah.
Like I remember that Will McCaskill guy made a charity list, and it like showed all the different all the major charities in the world, and like what is the most effective per dollar invested.
Yeah.
And that was, they sort of worked out that Malaria Foundation, based in Africa, is the most effective, and one of the least effective was the Clinton Foundation, which I found very interesting, because they sort of look at how much of the fees donated ends up in administration. I know you're going on this hike to Mount Kilimanjaro. I think it's October, so you're raising money for the Climb for the Clinic.
Climb for the Clinic, it's called. It's in its infancy, that campaign, but it's gearing up.
What are you most excited about for the future? What does the next few years look like?
Well, at the moment, it's just finishing this medical clinic, which we embarked on in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
So the clinic is in Malawi, in the same community where we've sponsored kids for since 2012.
What's the community?
It's called Monkey Bay.
Monkey Bay.
But the villages that we're actually centrally based in, where our NGO has a base called Namakoma Village. But then next door to that in Chisel, the village is where our clinic is. And there's... So going back to the medical clinic, my friend Tim Russell passed away from cancer at 25 in 2015. Mm-hmm. So off the back of that, there was... he being a big supporter and friend of mine in the early days of Educaring, there was obviously a lot of emotion around around his passing. So off the back of that, me and his brother organised the Run for Tim, which is we still get a group of close friends together every year and run the Melbourne Marathon. And the first year, obviously because the emotions were so high, we raised a lot of money for Educaring Africa and the Children's Hospital.
Uh-huh.
And prior to that, we'd just done some little small fundraisers for education and stuff, so we were used to like sort of small amounts and just, doing tidbits. And then all of a sudden we had this lump sum of money and we go, well, this is huge, what do we can't just like pull this into sponsoring kids in education. And for years, conversations with my business partner in Malawi at the NGO that we work with had talked about this idea of a medical clinic in the community, because there's a government hospital down the road, which is about 20 minutes away. But again, people in rural Africa don't have cars and easy access to transport. So if you do need just basic health care, a lot of the time they're not able to access that because the hospital's too far away, which is where our NGO, through volunteers, had for a long time played a role in doing community outreach, so setting up mobile clinics and stuff. So then the idea behind this clinic is that we'll centralise a lot of those, give people a facility within walking distance to go get your bandages done up, get your general health checks and all this sort of stuff that, the hospital is either too far away to do or sometimes just, beyond capacity to be able to provide that help because they're doing day surgeries or, they've got maternity and like sort of bigger things, and there's always a queue out the door for services. So... we embarked on that in 2015, and every year we've raised more and more money to just keep this thing going. And we've got a clinic built. It's nearly ready to open, which we're proud to say. We've put a lot of money and time into it, and we've brought groups of people over there to help build it. And so 2 different groups over from Australia now, which has been also something I'm incredibly proud of. Not just being able to host fundraisers here and fly the flag for little Malawi, but to be able to bring my friends and people who I care about over to the country that I love, and seeing them put a brick on a building is pretty powerful. Like from where it started, in a classroom in 2012, teaching kids to having my friends actually doing physical labour is extraordinary. So
it's nice.
The current emphasis is on finishing that. So the Climb for Clinic this year is about making a big statement. We're going to climb Kilimanjaro, which is around the same time that we normally do Run for Tim as well. So me and a few friends, with Janelle included, are going to embark up the mountain.
Are you gonna take your what do they call it? Not travel sickness, God, altitude sickness tablets?
Oh yeah, I don't know how I'm going to go with that.
Are you going to take it?
Yeah, probably.
You should. Because one of my favourite YouTube channels is Craig Adams, and he's like a guy who does hikes.
Okay.
And he just did the summit of Mount Kilimanjaro, but for some reason he did it on a tour group. He normally just goes lone trekking.
How did he go?
He got really sick.
Yeah,
because he didn't take, he thought, it's okay, I don't need the travel sickness tablets.
Yeah.
And he didn't take it, and he got really, really sick. Like his oxygen levels got down to like 50%.
Yeah.
So the porters literally had to take him down, and he was sick for it took him 2 weeks to recover.
Okay.
So
yeah, well, people respond to it in different ways. So
everyone responds different.
I've never been at high altitude, so I don't know how I'm going to go.
A lot of people on that group, like everyone on that group, got their injections or took their tablets, and so he was the only one who didn't do it, and he was the only one who got sick. He was the only one who didn't summit. I was like, damn. So make sure you do that.
Noted.
All right, we're going to get into some rapid fire questions to finish you off. What does your morning routine look like?
I don't really have one at the moment, to be honest. I'm too busy. I was like, this morning we had a community workshop in Docklands that I had to be up for at like 6:30 in the morning. I don't think I have an early start tomorrow, so I might sleep in
a
little bit. Yeah, but so it's gone out the window since taking over Hyperlocal News.
And how do you decompress at night if you can?
Good question. I'll just chill out, watch TV, try and take my mind off work. Yeah. Maybe listen to some music and go for a run. I love running when I can squeeze one in now in between the schedule.
What have you been watching of late?
Watching?
Docos, movies or TV shows?
To be honest, I don't watch a lot of TV.
Yeah.
I always watch ABC on a Monday night if I can, so I'll probably just stick to that.
I like that one. Yeah, we have Netflix, but more and more I'm using it less. Yeah. I think the main thing that I use is YouTube these days, but even then I barely watch TV. Yeah.
Janelle's got a Netflix account, so we watch a little bit on weekends when we're having a bit of downtime. But I think we started watching the Taylor Swift documentary.
Yeah. I heard about this.
But I didn't finish watching that, so that's the only thing that springs to mind recently that I've seen, to be honest.
All right, if you had to gift one book to the audience, what would it be and why? Let's say coming up for Christmas way down at the end of this year.
It'd be Charles R. Cross, Room Full of Mirrors, which is a biography about Jimi Hendrix.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jimi Hendrix fan, obviously.
Yeah.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
Last question for you. If you could have a billboard anywhere in Melbourne, where would it be? And what would you have on it?
It'd be on top of the Nilex silos, I reckon.
Okay.
Because I just have an affinity with...
classic.
Yeah. Well, because I'm a massive Paul Kelly fan. I got to interview him once too, which was a great moment.
Right.
But I used to live opposite the Nilex silos in an apartment on Clough Street, South Yarra. And I was actually living there at the time when people broke in and turned the Nilex clock back on, which I understand has been turned back on recently for this new development for a bit of a promo.
Yeah, well, it will be permanently back on. They're restoring it.
Yeah, but I just love... Yeah, I love that sort of that industrial part of Melbourne and that, like, the history of that clock and Paul Kelly and the music sort of association. So, yeah, chuck a billboard up there. Why not?
All right, where can people find you and what you're doing on the internet?
They can find educaringafrica.org, hyperlocalnews.com.au.
Yep.
And through Hyperlocal News, you can get to all our mastheads: CBD News, Docklands News, Southbank, localnews.com.au.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Sean, thanks so much for coming in, mate.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been good.
Beautiful.
Good to chat.
Thank you so much for watching Uncommon and this week's episode. If you like it, smash that like button. If you want to keep up to date with what we're doing, please do subscribe. We would love that. We'd love to build this audience that we're growing here of Uncommoners. If you want to keep up to date with audio, you can search for us on all of your good podcast apps. It's Uncommon or Uncommon Show. Will typically find us. For social, you want to see behind the scenes this amazing studio that I'm sitting in, just search at uncommon_show. And everything will be there, including our weekly promos. But look, thanks so much for stopping by. Until next time, thanks for watching.